Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California's May program meeting, co-sponsored by the China Society of Southern California. So this is a program where we share perspective into Chinese American and Asian American history through different topics and areas of interest. My name is Victoria Hong, and I'm a member on the board of directors and will be your moderator this evening. So before we begin, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping items. This program is being recorded and will be available to view on CHSSC's YouTube channel after the event. There will be a brief Q&A session after the presentation portion, and we invite you to bring your questions. The Q&A box is accessible on your Zoom screen, so throughout the program, as questions arise, please submit them there, and we can address them or direct them to our speaker at the end. And after the Q&A, this program will close out with a word about board elections from our CHSSC President, Eugene Moy. So let's begin. This evening, we'll be diving into the topic of food. Specifically, we'll be looking at Chinese food in a program titled How Los Angeles Rose from Obscurity to Become the Chinese Food Capital of the United States. To talk more about Chinese food and its history, I want to introduce you to our speaker tonight. He has dined at over 8,000 Chinese restaurants across the United States to try as many as possible and has kept documentation of them on an Excel spreadsheet. In turn, he has also emerged as a food historian, noting and capturing the evolution of Chinese restaurants over time. A Los Angeles native, a retired tax attorney, he's a writer and observer on Chinese food, its history, and the Chinese American experience in America. He's also a founding member and former board member of CHSSC's board of directors. So please welcome David R. Chan.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. I am David R. Chan, and it's great being back here giving another monthly presentation to this Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. Now, if you don't remember my last presentation, I don't mind. It was early in 1980 at the multi-purpose room at the Castle School, where I gave a presentation entitled A Postcard View of Chinatown, where I spoke and displayed some historic Chinatown postcards. And as indicated, I'm one of the charter members, member number 8, former board of directors. And for several years, I represented CHSSC in many public appearances on historic and contemporary Chinese American topics. Appeared on CBS Channel 2 back when the call letters were KNXT. I was the keynote speaker at the first Asian Pacific American Week, Heritage Week commemoration ever held in Chinatown. This was this very week back in 1979. And then in the early 1980s, I dropped totally out of sight thanks to 2 little kids and a increasingly difficult work schedule, and never to be heard from again, I thought. But due to an unusual series of circumstances, I'm back here, and I'm doing this presentation about the Chinese food in Los Angeles. Now, the subject of my presentation is how Los Angeles has risen from obscurity to become the Chinese food capital of the United States. But how the story of how we got there involves the broader topics of the history of the Chinese in America, the history of Chinese food in the United States, the history of Los Angeles, and my own personal recollections and family background. We will learn that these seemingly collateral topics, in fact, form the heart of what the status of Chinese food is today, and why the food on balance is better here in LA than in San Francisco, New York, or anywhere else in the country. Now, today, Los Angeles is one of the great cities of the world. So to find it as being a leader in anything is not surprising. But Los Angeles also has the shortest history of any great world city. In that regard, it's really amazing that we've reached the point where we are as being the Chinese food capital of the United States. Indeed, you need to look no further than the historical Cantonese names for the cities in Los Angeles. Obviously, San Francisco is the big dog called Dai Fao, first city, or the big city. So is Los Angeles Yifao or second city? No, that title goes to Sacramento. Well, how about Sam Fao or third city? That's Stockton. And actually, as far as I know, there is no fourth city in the Cantonese lore. And even if there were, it would not be Los Angeles. And the Cantonese name for Los Angeles is merely Lausanne. Uh, to look at this from another angle, you all have heard of the Chinese massacre of 1871, where a mob of Caucasians and Mexicans rampaged through Chinatown, killing 19 people, 19 Chinese. Not surprisingly, that was the national news story of the day across the United States. But that was also the first time anybody outside California ever heard of Los Angeles. Obviously, news of the massacre resonated with the people back east because their reaction was they thought they should send out missionaries to civilize the population. While the 1871 massacre put Los Angeles on the national map, however, it, it was a very small spot on that map because at that time, the total population of Los Angeles was just 5,000, not much bigger than the 4,000 people in Santa Barbara or the 3,000 in San Bernardino. Certainly nothing to indicate that this would someday be the site of a world-class city. In contrast, in 1870, San Francisco's population was already 150,000. And Los Angeles' population was only increasing to 11,000 by 1880, 50,000 by 1890, and 1900 it was still only 100,000, which, you know, just as an example, today the population of El Monte is 100,000. Now, putting aside this historical background for now, let's turn to Chinese food. And I'm sure most of you either remember or at least had heard of mid-20th century Chinese American food, which is really the core of what still is considered to be Americanized Chinese food. It has been said that food was one giant joke foisted on the American public for over a century because what Americans believed to be Chinese food was something that was totally unrecognizable to 99% of the people in China. Rather, that Chinese food was a historical accident tied to immigration patterns, United States immigration law, and demographic factors, which I will touch upon from in the rest of this presentation. Now, everybody knows that the Chinese came to America as part of the gold rush starting in 1849. What many people don't realize is that the Chinese fortune seekers did not come from all parts of China. Rather, they almost all came from one small region, uh, basically several rural districts in and around Toisan County in rural South China, about 60 miles outside of the city formerly known as Canton. To show you what a teeny speck Toisan is on the face of China, today the population of Toisan is 1 million people. Contrast this to the current population of China of 1.4 billion. So even back in the gold rush days and today, almost nobody in China ever heard of Toisan. I was in San Francisco, China recently, and I came across a restaurant called Beijing 49er, and I cringed because there were no Beijingers in the gold rush, and as far as I know, no Beijinger ever played football for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, there are three reasons for this narrowly concentrated migration of Chinese to the United States. First of all, economic and social conditions in rural South China were absolutely intolerable with famine and civil unrest, conditions that led people who were desperate to do something drastic, like go abroad to feed their families. Secondly, Canton was an international seaport, so the people in Toisan did have the access to go to the United States. And lastly, in fact, it was illegal for residents of China to immigrate from the country. However, because Canton was so far from the country's capital in the city formerly known as Peking, that particular law was unenforceable. So for 3 decades, from the 1850s to the 1880s, large numbers of uh, people migrated from Toisan to California in search of a better economic life, where they built the railroads and developed California's natural resources. It was said that in many of Toisan's village, every adult male was in California. Now, because all these migrants in California were adult males and they were in the workforce, their seeming presence in California was much greater than their actual numbers. And as their numbers grew, resentment and agitation in California against them grew, predominantly from Irish and other European immigrants who coined the catchphrase, "The Chinese must go," which culminated in 1882 in the enactment of the Chinese Exclusion Act, when the United States, this law remained in effect until 1943. And under this law, basically became illegal for most residents of China. And in addition, Chinese residents of other countries to migrate to the United States. Now, the Chinese Exclusion Act did not completely cut off immigration from China to the United States. There were exemptions in the Exclusion Act for merchants, students, diplomats, and clergy. In addition, Chinese born in the United States were American citizens and not subject to the Chinese Exclusion Act. More importantly, the foreign-born children of American-born Chinese were also American citizens, which is a very important fact. Uh, so you did have continued immigration during the exclusion period, but frankly, a good portion of it was illegal. And one source estimates that 90% of the Chinese immigrants during this time period were illegal. Most of these migrants were so-called paper sons who purchased the identity of either someone who was qualified to come to the United States, or, as more often the case, the identity of a non-existent person who qualified for the exemption. In any event, virtually all the migrants during the exclusion period were either family or friends of the existing Chinese in the United States. The result is that for a century, almost the entirety of the Chinese community in the United States consisted of migrants from Toisan and their progeny. The importance of this fact cannot be overemphasized. Let me give you this reverse analogy to demonstrate. It would be as if every American resident in China came from the hills of West Virginia. With this background, it's easy to see where the joke lies. Chop suey, sweet and sour pork, bugu gai pan, egg foo young, egg drop soup were not the national dishes of China. but rather dishes that may have had roots in rural Toisan, but which were adaptive to American ingredients, and then also adapted to American tastes when the American public started patronizing Chinese restaurants around the turn of the 20th century, and other demographic factors, which I will get into. Uh, so, and while all stripes of Chinese foods are now found in the United States, this old version, distorted version of Chinese food is still the version that a good portion of the American public has until this day. Now, at this point, I have a confession to make. As a kid growing up in Los Angeles, I ate almost no Chinese food and hated what Chinese food I did eat. So you may wonder, uh, what makes me qualified to give this presentation today? Well, the answer is very simple. Your program director made a horrible mistake by inviting me to speak here today. In fact, recently, when somebody I knew way back when had heard that I was speaking and writing about Chinese food, they were incredulous. Or to quote them, David Chan speaking about Chinese food? Well, given that I've been allotted an hour of speaking time, it's too late to turn back now. Seriously, though, how I developed from someone eschewing Chinese food to someone here today talking to you about Chinese food probably best illustrates the evolution of Chinese food in the United States over the years. And my personal recollections and family history are a critical part of this discussion. My grandfather Chan came to the United States from Toisan in 1880. Shortly after 1900, he brought his concubine to the United States in violation of the Chinese Exclusion Act because only his wife would have been qualified to come into the United States. My maternal grandfather Wong came to the United States in 1915 as a paper son. In 1920, he brought his wife to Los Angeles, all of which makes me the grandson of three illegal aliens, but no surprise based on the statistics that I just mentioned to you. When I was born in Los Angeles, the Chinese population was 5,000, most of whom, almost all of them were Toisan. Uh, in comparison, there were 30,000 Japanese in Los Angeles. The total population of Los Angeles was 2 million, which meant that only 1 in every 400 Angelino was Chinese. Today, there are roughly 600,000 Chinese in Los Angeles, not very many of whom are Toisan. Uh, Growing up as a kid in Los Angeles, in fact, I ate almost no Chinese food uh, and hated it. When my parents took me to Chinese banquets, I would eat soy sauce and rice and nothing else. Now, in a way, I had a partial excuse because Los Angeles was such a minor Chinese community at that time that a lot of the really good dishes never made it down from San Francisco to Los Angeles. I mean, compared the 5,000 Chinese in Los Angeles to the Chinese population in San Francisco at the time, which was 75,000. Now, if you look at the census figures at the time, it doesn't show that large a population, but the census count of the Chinese is understated by multiples because there are so many illegal Chinese in San Francisco who did not want to be counted in the census. It's a very complicated, very complicated subject. And the only thing I'll add about that is it's related to the 1908 earthquake. And let me explain that my experiences with Chinese food as a child were not quite as odd as they may strike you. That's because when the Los Angeles Chinese community was very small and the Chinese Exclusion Act was still in effect, that I and most of my contemporaries were American born and Americanized. Virtually all of my relatives, uh, my parents, my parents' Chinese friends, my aunts and my uncles were all Americanized, born in the US. We ate very little Chinese food at home. My mom did not have a wok. Uh, when I was a boy, we didn't even celebrate Chinese New Year. At home, we didn't speak Chinese, primarily largely because my parents' primary language was English, but also because my parents did not want me to learn Chinese because they felt if I learned Chinese, it might affect my ability to speak perfect English. And they knew that any excuse could be used back then to discriminate against you if you were Chinese. Now, this is not to say that American-born Chinese fit in with the greater community. Indeed, far from it. I mentioned my parents and my aunts and my uncles being American-born, but none of them, and back in their day, none of them bothered going to college, even if they could afford it, because there were no jobs available for Chinese college graduates. My dad graduated from college at age 33, and all my uncles graduated from college well after starting high school and only after World War II, which opened up a lot of economic opportunity for minorities and women. And even by the time I came along, there's still so few of us that were oddities. Even in 1970, when I took my first outside job for the summer, and after working a few weeks of working days there together, I mentioned to one of my fellow coworkers about my Chinese background. He said, "You're Chinese? I thought you were Mexican." Stunned, I asked him why he thought I was Mexican, and his reply was very telling. Here's a guy born and raised in Los Angeles, and he tells me I was the first Chinese person he had met in his life. Okay, so how did we get from the point where Chinese food was this boring mutation that I refused to eat to today's Chinese food scene, which fully represents the wonderful varieties of Chinese food that we have today? Well, not surprisingly, it all goes back to the immigration laws. As I mentioned, the Chinese exclusion law was uh, repealed in 1943 as a wartime accommodation to our ally China. But at that time, the American immigration law was based on a national origins quota system, meaning a country's immigration quota was based on the proportion of its residents currently in the U.S. Well, there were hardly any Chinese in the United States, so China was given a whopping annual immigration quota of 105. So really, Chinese exclusion was repealed in 1943, but that was more symbolic than real. It was really not until 1965 in the Immigration Reform Act when the national origins quota system was replaced, and in place of that was a new system where every country had the same maximum quota. As a result, China now had the same annual quota as Great Britain. Now, since the United States and mainland China were not on speaking terms at the time, the entire Chinese quota was used by migrants from Hong Kong and Taiwan. And the effect on Chinese food in America was immediate. Chinese-speaking immigrants from Hong Kong piled into and rejuvenated America's Chinatowns, bringing a new, different, delicious form of Chinese food, which supplanted the old peasant food that I disliked. Uh, Los Angeles Chinatown was especially transformed by this infusion because Los Angeles's original Chinatown was torn down in the 1930s to make way for the Union Station. So for decades, the Los Angeles did not have a true traditional Chinatown. Yes, there was a replacement new Chinatown built on Hill Street, North Broadway, but that was not a real and complete Chinatown because there were Chinese restaurants and gift shops and wishing wells, but there were hardly any residential areas because old Chinatown's residents had to vacate before the construction of new Chinatown, and they were forced to disperse outside of Chinatown. Old Chinatown's residents largely moved to an area south of downtown, adjacent to the Chinese-founded City Market Produce Terminal, and then south to the East Adams area. What this did and resulted in the City Market area being the real unsung Chinatown of the day, but a Chinatown that few people in Los Angeles knew existed. Meanwhile, with New Chinatown, with very few Chinese residents, effectively became an ethnic theme park, a theme park where the cast members went home someplace else at night. So essentially, Chinatown was a ethnic tourist trap. And growing up in the 1950s and early 1960s, I have very few recollections of even going to Chinatown. Okay, that's the Cantonese. Meanwhile, the Mandarin-speaking Taiwanese did not come into Chinatown because they spoke Mandarin. They ended up in other locations. One alternative notable location was Manhattan, where tiny Taiwanese chefs opened up dozens, if not hundreds, of Chinese restaurants offering the very first glimpse of Hunan and Sichuan style food, which had never before been seen in the United States. But this was a full Sichuan and a full Hunan style food because these Taiwanese chefs themselves had left China 2 decades previously to go to Taiwan. So that removed the food, both time and space, by 1 degree. Plus, these chefs had been cooking for the military elite of Taiwan. So their repertoire was not home-style food and was obviously more elevated than the cuisine as a whole. Because these Taiwanese chefs opened up mostly in New York, which had no residents from Sichuan or Hunan, their primary clientele was native New Yorkers. As a result, they had to change their food to the taste of these native New Yorkers, leading to another degree of separation of the food from China to the United States. Now, the food created a sensation as Upper Manhattan went into the frenzy and over all these new dishes, new ingredients, and new recipes, literally garnishing major news coverage in New York. Meanwhile, Middle America was being swept by faux Hunan and faux Sichuan dishes, such as hot and sour soup, sizzling rice soup, General Tso's chicken, Mushu pork, Kung Pao chicken, all added now to the pantheon of Chinese American dishes. Now, returning to my personal history, at the same time as these immigration law changes were occurring, I was going to school at UCLA. And in my last undergraduate semester, UCLA offered the very first Asian American Studies course, uh, tellingly entitled Orientals in America. And I was captivated by the topic of the experience of the Chinese people in the United States and the fact that we Chinese Americans had our own history. And this was one of the triggers that led to my lifetime study of Chinese food in the United States. And there are a couple other factors added leading me down to the path to the study of Chinese food. When I entered into the workforce in 1973, I made the acquaintance of friends that work who were originally from Hong Kong and Taiwan, and who had shown a passion for Chinese food, which I was totally unfamiliar with. Uh, my friends had been the vanguard of the first immigrants under the new immigration law was, and they showed me where you can get this new brands of exciting Chinese food. This upgraded Chinese food sparked an interest in me, and since it was so much better than what I was used to. And as I started to travel around the country, I made it a point to eat at Chinese restaurants to the extent possible as part of a greater interest in seeing Chinese communities and Chinese people throughout the United States. Now, even as Los Angeles began to grow as a center of Chinese community and cuisine in the 1980s, the Chinese food in San Francisco was still superior. Uh, we Chinese in Los Angeles uh, frequently spoke among ourselves about the newest Chinese restaurants in San Francisco, when we would go up there, and what dishes we would order when we got there. Uh, I remember one time, one Saturday morning, my wife and I got on a plane, flew into San Francisco, went to the latest and greatest Chinese restaurant there, had lunch, had dinner, and flew back down after dinner, same day. But San Francisco's culinary dominance was about to end. And toward the end of the 1980s, me and my friends started talking about Chinese food in Manhattan and how there are all these great new Chinese restaurants in New York. When we would go to New York, and what we would order when we got there. Now, New York wasn't a place where we could fly there and back in the same day, but we all decided that it was a place we had to visit. My wife and I flew to New York and back on an eating trip, as so did a lot of my friends. Uh, Interestingly, New York's top stay at the top of the heat as Chinese food in the United States was short, but it did meet the edge of San Francisco's dominance. Now, any jockeying for Chinese food supremacy in the United States became irrelevant due to one major event, and this was the impending transfer of Hong Kong from Hong Kong to China to 1997. And as the date got closer, anyone in Hong Kong had the ability to leave Hong Kong did so. And starting in the late 1980s, the primary destination for these expatriates from Hong Kong was Vancouver, not New York, Los Angeles, or San Francisco, because Canada was a less restrictive entry point for these migrants. Uh, Suddenly, Vancouver turned into the near culinary uh, equivalent of Hong Kong. And now nobody in the US talked about going anywhere in the United States to find Chinese food. All eyes are on Vancouver. When could we plan our next trip to Vancouver? What restaurants will we try? What will we order? The differential between Vancouver and the food here was so great that when I went to Vancouver to eat Chinese food, I literally did not bother to eat Chinese food back home for at least a month. Now, fortunately, not every great Chinese chef moved to Vancouver. A number of them came to Los Angeles and to San Francisco, raising the local bar for Cantonese food. And more of these migrants made their way to Los Angeles and San Francisco, uh, such that in the early 1990s, LA passed New York and San Francisco for Chinese food supremacy. But ascension of Los Angeles to the top of the heap in the US was really meaningless because that was like being the biggest midget in a circus because you had the gem that was Vancouver on the other side of the border. On the other hand, be, uh, be, despite Vancouver's food being so much better, unless you live someplace like Seattle, it's not like you could go there regularly to eat. And yes, I would not eat Chinese food in Los Angeles for a month after coming back from Vancouver, but yeah, I started eating Chinese food again. Consequently, the early 1990s were the start of a new golden age of Cantonese food in Los Angeles, with bigger Hong Kong style seafood and dim sum places popping up, capped by the 900-seat Ocean Star seafood restaurant in Monterey Park that opened in 1992. But even as the golden age for Cantonese food uh, would go on for a couple of decades, the seeds of its demise were already being planted. Because in 1979, the United States and China resumed diplomatic uh, relations. This, in turn, resulted in the first migration of non-Cantonese residents of China to mainland China to the United States. Initially, this first migration came from Shanghai and Beijing, such that by the mid-1980s, you started to see Beijing and Shanghai style Chinese restaurants in Los Angeles, followed by a small number of even Hunan and Sichuan style restaurants in the 1990s. But it wasn't until after the turn of the 21st century that you started to see migrants from the rest of China coming to San Gabriel, coming to the United States, and bringing all the different regional variations of food here. So that's the timeline of the evolution and of Chinese food in the United States and my thoughts about where the best food has been. But given my confession earlier in my presentation, really, how do you believe what I could say? So let me tell you really why you can believe my points that I made. As I mentioned, was meeting these co-workers at work who had such a history of high quality Chinese food that changed my viewpoint of Chinese food. But my friends landed in a Chinese food desert. And so as each and every new Chinese food restaurant opened up over here, it was a really big event. And I heavily followed them as they tried out all the new restaurants. And it's not like these restaurants opened every day of the week. So as long as you ate at the restaurants as they opened, you kept track of all of them. At some point in time, I discovered I needed to keep track of where I have eaten. So I developed my spreadsheet of Chinese restaurants I've eaten at, which is Victoria mentioned numbers over 8,600, and includes virtually every Chinese restaurant that has operated in the San Gabriel Valley over the last 50 years. And that's the time when the first authentic Chinese restaurant opened up in Monterey Park. Uh, and more fortunately, I had a job which enabled me to travel to visit every Chinese community in the country where I could taste all the food, and I was able to compare the food in the various regions. So with that background, I'm blessed with the ability of eating at a large number of Chinese restaurants, and I'm able to compare all the restaurants. So let's look at why the Chinese food in LA is the best in the country. Strangely, a major factor is the decline of Cantonese food. Uh, for 150 years, Cantonese food was synonymous with with Chinese food in the United States. But all of a sudden, it became a second page two story, except that in right before the pandemic, the Los Angeles Times ran this story about how the iconic 900-seat Ocean Star restaurant in Monterey Park had gone out of business. That space was vacant for over a year. During the pandemic, another large seafood palace named King Hua fell victim to the pandemic. It was vacant for a year when it was finally reopened as a Sichuan nightclub. And then we had the pioneering upscale banquet hall that originally opened up in Monterey Park as Harbor Village, and that shut down and turned the entire three-story mall into a giant white elephant. And then this year, we had five-star free seafood in San Gabriel, moving and merging with the banquet facility at the San Gabriel Hilton across the street. So right there, you have 2,000 Chinese banquet seats taken out of circulation. The decline of Cantonese food is more starkly demonstrated by another statistic. In examining new Chinese restaurant openings in the San Gabriel Valley over the last decade, fewer than 10% are Cantonese. Not to say Cantonese food is only 10% of the total market, because there are a lot of big Cantonese restaurants that don't turn over, but still, clearly, in today's Chinese communities all across America, non-Cantonese food is king. And in that regard, the breadth and depth of Cantonese regional cuisines is unmatched. Perhaps most importantly, mainland Chinese chains are pouring into Los Angeles, often setting up their first American branches here because this is a place to be. A decade ago, often setting up the first American branch here was the thing to do because this was the place to be. Now, the fact that a new Chinese restaurant is based in Sichuan or based somewhere else in mainland China is irrelevant because it's just no longer news. Another factor is how Los Angeles Chinese pioneers Chengdu taste and Sichuan impression in a decade turned Sichuan-style Chinese food on its head by introducing modern Chinese Sichuan food to the United States and immediately gaining national attention. Essentially, they rewrote Sichuan-style restaurants menus throughout the country, which had been established before the uh, legalization of Sichuan peppercorns in the United States over 15 years ago. In addition, and maybe most important of all, are the demographic factors. While Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York each have over 600,000 residents, only Los Angeles has the San Gabriel Valley. As described by Los Angeles Times food writer Lucas Juan Peterson in his video on Chinese food in the San Gabriel, in which I made an appearance, the San Gabriel Valley is essentially a 200 square mile Chinatown, chock full of every Chinese food available. Now, how the Chinese community established and grew in the San Gabriel Valley is very interesting, but very little known and surprising. In the first half of the 20th century, Los Angeles was one of the most racially segregated cities in America when it came to housing patterns. Not to say Los Angeles was the most racist city, not at all. Rather, it reflected a peculiar set of local circumstances. Los Angeles exploded in size in the early 20th century from 100,000 residents in 1900 to nearly 1.3 million by 1930. Naturally, this meant the construction of a massive amount of housing in a short period of time. The dark side of this housing boom was that it happens to coincide with the rise of something called the racial restrictive covenant that swept across large American cities across the South, largest American cities outside the South, including Los Angeles. And basically, most newly constructed houses in these cities now contained a deed restriction, which said the house could only be occupied by members of the Caucasian race, and if a non-Caucasian were to occupy the house other than as a domestic help, ownership of the property would revert to the original developer. Consequently, if you were Chinese, Japanese, Mexican, or African American in Los Angeles, you were restricted to neighborhoods which were developed basically before 1915, which was a very small part of the housing stock in Los Angeles. Specifically, Chinese were mostly found on the east and south part of Los Angeles. Now, the racial restrictive covenant was nullified by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1948, but racial discrimination continued past that point, and best demonstrated by a personal experience. In the early 1960s, I was in high school, and my parents had moved us to Crenshaw in a neighborhood of Los Angeles, where which had been integrated after the 1948 Supreme Court decision. But now we wanted to move a couple miles away to a bigger house. So our real estate broker took us to a house 2 miles away, and he showed it to us. And after we saw the house, the broker took us aside and said, "Don't bother to make an offer on this house All the neighbors on this block have made a pact not to sell to a non-white. And this is the background which the San Gabriel Valley Chinatown was born, because the Japanese Americans were under the same housing restrictions, and there was a large Japanese American community just on the other side of the Monterey Park City line. So while the late 1950s, this neighborhood was condemned for the construction of the Pomona Freeway. So at the same time, as these Japanese were looking for a new place to live, new housing developments were being constructed in Monterey Park. But Monterey Park was a whites-only community, and instead was a hotbed of Ku Klux Klan activity and a sundown town 3 decades previously. Nevertheless, some of these Japanese inquired as to whether they could buy homes in the new tract. There were no existing neighbors in the tract to stop them, been the case with existing neighborhoods. And the builders are happy to sell their houses to buyers of all colors. So many Japanese bought new houses there. Shortly thereafter, in the early 1960s, another new tract appeared near a part of East LA where there are a lot of Chinese Americans, El Sereno area. And same thing, Chinese asked if they could buy houses. Yes, they did. And by 1970, there were a couple of thousand Chinese Americans, largely professionals, living in the hills of Monterey Park. At this time, this collided with the establishment of this Chinese community collided with the new immigration. And a young Taiwanese immigrant came to Monterey Park. He saw the nice suburban neighborhood with a couple of thousand Chinese American residents, and he had a vision. And he went and marketed Monterey Park to buyers in China, no, buyers in Taiwan and in Hong Kong as the Hong Kong Beverly Hills, and it worked. And thanks to him, first Monterey Park and then adjacent communities, moving, San Gabriel, Arcadia, all the way out to Rowland Heights, ended up forming this great Chinese community. And the other large demographic point to point out is the existence of what's called the 626 generation. This is a generation of young Chinese American millennials and Gen X foodies who are looking for their next great meal. There's nothing in of the other cities, nothing like this in New York and San Francisco. And just the fact that you have all these Chinese foodies really ups the ante and raises the quality of the Chinese food in this community. There's a lot more to be said, but I see I'm running out of time. So just thanks for the opportunity to give this presentation.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm still sitting in awe with your 8,600 plus count number of restaurants. So I have some questions, and I'm sure others do too after hearing everything you've just shared. And so let's transition to our Q&A portion. If you haven't already, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box on your Zoom screen, and we'll try to answer them while we have David here on our program. And so on the topic of LA Chinatown, a question came in. And it says, do you remember HK Lo Restaurant in LA Chinatown? Their father, the late Bill Hong, was the manager, and Cantonese cuisine was served there.
Right. Although it probably goes Down in history is being more well known for punk rock, but yes, uh, yes, that's that was the scene of many community banquets in the 1960s.
And then you had also mentioned you were fortunate of getting to travel for work and dining at restaurants all around. And we had a question come in. Did you eat in any Chinese restaurants in Rock Springs, Wyoming? Their family owned the new Grand Cafe there.
Yes, I did because I'm aware of the historic significance of Springs. So when I was in, let's see, where was I? Was in Salt Lake City one year, and I took a side trip to Rock Springs, but it's on my list. It's a Chinese buffet. I don't remember the name, but yes, I have eaten Chinese food in Rock Springs, Wyoming.
All right. So I've got a question. This is tied more to the Chinese Historical Society. So back when the society began, way in 1975, what moved you, David, to join the Historical Society and the board of directors?
Well, well, as indicated, I had been a uh, studied the topic of Asian American studies at UCLA, and I enjoyed it so much that even after I took that class and I was going to law school, I spent most of my time reading about Chinese American topics rather than uh, doing legal stuff. And it was just an extension of that. It was just a natural extension of what I was interested in.
Another question regarding your spreadsheets. Do you rate the restaurants after eating there, like on a numeric scale of some sort? Love to know what your spreadsheet tracks aside from the name and the location of the restaurant.
Uh, it's basically just the name, location, year, and numerical, our cardinal order, so this is number 8615 or whatever. Uh, I mean, is there any way for either us to arrange for people to contact me offline? I could, they can ask questions. I could send them copies of the schedule.
I think we can arrange for that. Well, we can touch base, David, after this, and we can find a way to have folks funnel in additional questions your way.
Mhm.
We've got time for one last question here. So I see one that says, do you think these quote unquote 626 foodies are a largely positive thing for the Chinese community? Or do you think that these Chinese neighborhoods face a risk of gentrification?
Well, I don't think there's any downside to the 626 foodies because that's the next generation of Chinese Americans, and they're connecting with their heritage. They're supporting the community. Uh, if any, as far as 626 area is concerned, if there's any gentrification, they're moving into parts of the San Gabriel Valley, which were not Chinese before. So it's expanding. So yeah, I think it's all positive.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us this evening. You've
Well, thanks for
spoken
having me.
Yeah, you've spoken with so many historical facts and information to highlight for us the history of Chinese food in Los Angeles and in America, and just the connection to you and your family's experience. And over time, Los Angeles has certainly emerged as the epicenter of Chinese cuisine in this country, not just in the sheer number of restaurants, but also in its diversity and reinvention. And what's even more nuanced is that the food and dishes don't just tell a story about the food as you've shown us, but rather they're also stories of culture, of immigration, of community, identity, and memory in a new space. So Thank you so much again.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I will now introduce our CHSSC President Eugene Moy to share a bit about our upcoming board elections. Eugene.
Great. Hi, is my audio coming through?
Yes.
Hello? Yeah, great. Thank you, David, by the way. I've known you for many years and knew that you had quite a list, but now you've pushed past the 8,000 mark. What exactly, how many do you have actually right now?
8630 something.
8630. Okay, so that's a lot of food, but if I may, I'll ask one question. Do you like chop suey? What do you
Not
think of it?
at all.
Well, actually, please uh, uh, bear with me, everyone. I happen to like chop suey because I'm the kind of guy who at home will throw a lot of things into the pot and mix it, and sometimes I come up with some interesting jambalayas. So this is what you do with chop suey. At least I do, anyway, with the sprouts. But one thing I'm going to announce our upcoming Yosemite trip for everyone. But one of the stops on the way to Yosemite is in Fresno, which formerly had a Chinatown. And there's an old cafe there right now that at least in the recent past, I didn't go last year, but in the recent past, this cafe on either F or G Street in Fresno, Chinatown, sold chop suey omelets. And to me, I, I thought it was great, you know. So maybe I'm sure, David, maybe in your journeys, you've encountered places like that are kind of hybrid kinds of locations. Uh, You know, there are, I think, some Vietnamese brothers who run the place now, but to me anyway, the chop suey omelets sure tasted good.
Well, there's a chow mein sandwich.
Right, right. That
And
was
apparently before that, there was a chop suey sandwich.
yeah. So if you like well, so food is all about flavor, right? And you, whether it's the chengdu or the hot peppercorns, the numbing peppercorns, or the seasoning, the salt, or the seafood aromas. I think that's what we go for. By the way, thank you all to everyone attending today. I think there were at one point there were 49 folks on the agenda here on the attendee list, and many of you are longtime friends, and I love seeing all your names. I wish I could see you personally at some point soon.